Welcome to another episode of the Engage Parish podcast. Today we will be discussing artificial intelligence and what this means for the church and our world. Today we are joined by Matthew Sanders. Matthew is the CEO of Longbeard. Longbeard is building, as they put it, Catholic AI, and they are the company behind Magisterium AI, Vulgate AI, and the Christendom app. You can actually find the Engage Parish podcast on the Christendom app. Matthew spent 5 years working for the Archdiocese of Toronto before founding Longbeard. Today, we are going to explore artificial intelligence, known as AI, and how the church is responding to the leaps in innovation that AI is experiencing. We'll also be discussing how the church can potentially help shape and leverage AI for the furthering of the church's mission to preach the gospel in all places. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Matthew, you've definitely been a busy man recently. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and what led you into your journey in the world of AI?
Well, I started my career in the military, and eventually ended up leaving the military to join the seminary, which I did for a couple of years, and then ended up working for the Archdiocese of Toronto. And it was there I got involved in kind of media and technology. And I felt that there was a lot more opportunity to leverage technologies. I'm sure you guys agree, to benefit the church's mission. And so eventually I left the Archdiocese to found Longbeard. And after a couple of years, we ended up working a lot in Rome for a number of Vatican institutions and things like that. And we ended up moving our office there. And it was there that we started to get more immersed in kind of the broader issue of artificial intelligence. Generative AI hadn't hit the scene yet, but it was still something that people were thinking a lot about. I became very fascinated with technology and its possibilities, and once OpenAI kind of put generative AI on the map with ChatGPT, we saw a unique opportunity to leverage, and that's kind of how we ended up diving into it.
Yeah, and the product that really has stood out in my mind is Magisterium AI. I've seen it quite a bit in Catholic news. And as we dive into our conversation, can you start out by telling us what AI is specifically for those who, I'm sure everyone's heard of AI at this point, but maybe aren't familiar with what exactly it means, and then also what Magisterium AI is in particular?
Sure. I think the simplest way to explain what artificial intelligence is to think of it as humanity's attempt to try and replicate cognition inside of a machine. So the ability to kind of learn, think, and know. As far as Magisterium AI, Magisterium AI is a form of generative AI, so it's what we call a compound AI system. So it leverages several AI technologies under the hood, and the reason that we created it was to try and mitigate some of the downsides of kind of conventional AI. So great tools like ChatGPT and other AI apps have this. You have the issues such as propensity to hallucinate. They're very eager to please, and so they have a tendency to make things up if they don't know the answer. They also are not transparent about where their generation comes from. They don't provide direct citations to what that they're generating. And so we wanted to see if it would be possible to build an AI system that would address those among other issues. And that's why we built Magisterium AI as kind of a test. And to this day, we've been able to make a lot of progress in that area. So I'm very hopeful for the technology.
And is Magisterium AI open for anyone to go try out and use for themselves right now?
Yep. Yeah, it's free. So up to, I think, 60 queries a week, anyone can use it. And that resets every week, which I think for most people that's generally enough. We built the technology to help make available church teaching to basically anyone in the world on any device in their native language. That was kind of our mission. So church teaching, which includes the magisterial content, but also embraces the wider Catholic theological thought. So the Fathers of the Church, the Bible, biblical commentary, canon law, that kind of thing. And so the cool thing about generative AI and the AI system we kind of built is it allows anyone in the world to query knowledge, even if it's not in their own language. So when they go to the platform, they submit a prompt that's converted into like a mathematical expression of what you're looking for, and that's used to then search all the church's knowledge, and it basically extracts knowledge from all kinds of documents in all kinds of different languages, and the AI then reads them and then provides you an answer based on what it's found. And so everything that Magisterium AI says is grounded in a source, and that way it helps to address that kind of trust issue.
Hey there, sorry for this brief interruption, but we wanted to give you a quick heads up. If you're enjoying the Engage Parish, head over to ecatholic.com/podcast and sign up for our newsletter. There you'll get updates on new episodes, behind the scenes content, and more. And of course, this show is brought to you by eCatholic, the engagement platform of the Catholic Church. Be sure to check us out at ecatholic.com. Now back to the show.
I mentioned you've been a busy man, and I know you've recently hosted the Builders AI Forum at the Vatican to discuss the role of artificial intelligence in society and its implications for the church. Can you tell us a little bit about why this conference was called, what you guys discussed, and why does the church care about developments in AI anyways?
Well, we called the conference because I know that specifically within the church, there was a lot of questions about AI. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it something that people should be using, or should they be staying away from it? And so what we wanted to do is trying to bring together people, specifically those who are involved in building within the church, so companies and organizations, and as well as investors and others. And we want to have kind of an open conversation about, where does the church stand in AI? How should we be using it, and in what ways should the church be more engaged or involved in larger conversations of AI, especially in the secular realm. I think it was an interesting group of people, and there were a lot of diverse opinions. But I think ultimately people recognize, as the Holy Father has said on many occasions, that it's an important tool, one that the church can't disregard or ignore. Much like the printing press, it has enormous potential to do good if it's wielded in the right way. And so the question is just discerning what is that right way. One of the things what I tried to do in my kind of presentation specifically on Catholic AI is to explain some of the challenges we've had to overcome in helping to try and build faithful Catholic AI, where we're at now and what we're hoping to do with it in the future. And I think that was what generally well received. And then also there was on the philosophical side, we didn't want to have a forum like this without talking about the philosophical implications of AI. And so one of the specific focus areas was this area of consciousness. If an AI were to come and say, "I'm alive, I deserve rights," how do we handle that? I mean, do we just dismiss those rights claims, out of hand, or do we have to actually discern and think about this? I mean, if the Turing test and other tests that have been used in the past to determine whether a being is conscious or not, if the AI is passing those flying colors, what do we do, right? And so that's one of the specific areas in the church I think that we can add a lot of value. But of course, to do that, we have to get clear about what is consciousness from a Catholic perspective, study that. And that's one of the reasons why we want to facilitate this conversation, was to encourage more study of what is a Catholic understanding of consciousness. And that could eventually help to develop better testing methodologies.
That's very interesting. And it's exciting to see the philosophical ramifications of this. I hadn't quite thought those through. I'm sure this was discussed as well, but how do you and maybe also the participants in the conference see AI aligning with, or even perhaps enhancing, the church's mission?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is, AI is AI is several different components to it, but really it's just an algorithm, right? So when we talk about AI supporting the church's mission, this is not some kind of like artificial consciousness, which is doing theology and guiding people spiritually. That's not what it is at all. What it really is trying to figure out a way to take the enormous amount of content which is available. If you talk about a couple thousand years of magisterial teaching, right, and not to mention all the theological and philosophical reflections of the fathers of the church, how do we take all of that information and make it available to people? And that's really what the Catholic Church's approach to AI really consists of for the most part. Now, there's several other applications of it. I can talk about Vulgate AI and stuff, but for the most part, it's trying to figure out how do we take how the Spirit is communicated through people, and through their writings and through what they've said, and how do we make that available to people? So that's really what the project is about. Is really just trying to make sure that everyone has at their fingertips that which they need to kind of think through these moral and spiritual questions.
Could you go through that? It just hit me, the difference between Magisterium AI and Vulgate AI.
Sure. So Magisterium AI is, in many sense, they have several architectural. There's a lot of similar architecture, but they different in kind of their target audiences. So Magisterium AI was kind of built to basically allow anyone in the world, regardless of their means, regardless of what their profession may be, to access church teaching and leverage it for their particular purposes, whether that be personal, whether that be for business. And our longer term, our vision for Magisterium AI is a bit more kind of broad. So in the sense that we're working right now building a voice UI, so people can actually talk to Magisterium AI and have interactions. It can be involved in helping in an educational capacity. So if it's given a specific curriculum, it can work with a particular individual to help them make sure they're understanding concepts and things like that. So for the most part, you can think of that as kind of like a front end for Catholic AI. And I should note as well, part of this is about trying to figure out how does the Catholic Church build its own Catholic language model, and that's something that we've been working on. We just finished post-training the world's first Catholic language model called Ephraim. and then figuring out how to make that accessible to people. And so Magister AI is kind of a vehicle for accessing that particular language model and leveraging it. So Vulgate AI is different in the sense that it was primarily built at the behest of at the time Pontifical Oriental Institute to help solve the issue of library digitization. So they have one of the rarest collections of libraries in the Eastern churches. And so, but their issue is their constituencies in the Middle East, East Africa, India, and for students to get on a plane and pull books out, that was just prohibitive. And so he wanted to find Father Nazar, who was the rector at the time, wanted to find a way to democratize access to the library. And so he asked us if there's a way we could digitize the library's contents and make it accessible to people online. And so what he wanted though was he wanted the library to be made available to anyone in the world on any device in their native language. So the first approach we took to this just wasn't going to work. It'd be too expensive. But when AI hit the scene, we saw the opportunity using kind of like vector databases and things to take the content of within the library and vectorize it. So convert it from plain text into a mathematical expression of the meaning of the books. And if we could build a platform on top of that, people could then write their prompts, like in Magister AI, like ChatGPT, write a prompt that's converted to a vector, and then you could go through and search all the contents of the library, regardless of what language they're in, extract the insights, and let the AI do the translating for you and things like that. So the platform has kind of two components to it. One is about ingesting works. So how do we scale up digitization, physical digitization of books and things like that? And so using AI, we take like a scanned book and we extract the text and clean it up and then we convert it into a vector. There's a bunch of other steps involved there, but it's and trying to remove the human in the loop there as much as possible. So the AI is doing most of that heavy lifting, and that we've had a lot of success with. And then the other part is just basically providing a UI for people to leverage keyword search and we call neural semantic search, which is similar to how Google works. When you submit a query, like for instance, what is the stock price, for Apple? How does Google know you're talking about the company, not the fruit? That's because they convert your query so they can understand the intent mathematically, so they can understand the intent of your search. And so we wanted a platform that could leverage that kind of powerful search within an academic context. But we since going to be expanding it. So the idea was to allow libraries to digitize their own holdings, but then to be able to share their holdings with others. And so the platform is designed for kind of library sharing. And then now we're expanding this to include other organizations as well that have knowledge that they want to digitize because they want to make it available to more people. And so the platform will be moving on to Catholic ministries and dioceses and so on.
And you just hinted at this, but in your view, what are key ways AI can actually help serve parishes, schools, ministries today?
Well, I think there's several ways. One, as a convert to the faith, I remember when I was trying to wrap my head around, it was a lot to take in, right? So I think catechetics is a really big one. I think we put a lot of pressure on our priests to be kind of this walking, Catholic encyclopedias. And so I think allowing people to have a kind of a safe place where they can ask questions about the faith, about doctrine, but also moral questions and things like that. And I think, it's helpful recognizing that, in the spirit of meeting people where they're at, to be able to kind of have a platform that people can interact with on their device. And so if they are out somewhere with friends and someone asks a question or makes an accusation, they can kind of look it up and they can check and see if that is what the Catholic Church teaches. So I think catechetics is a really powerful one. I think a way of supporting priests as well. One of the most popular ways of using Magister AI is kind of in homily preparation. So we're not trying to, obviously, we don't want homilies to be AI generated here, but certainly because there's so much knowledge accessible via our knowledge base within Magister AI, and we're talking hundreds of years of homilies of the popes here. If a priest is crafting, putting together a homily, it's helpful for research. They can pull quotes from the popes or biblical commentary from the fathers and assemble that. So we're hoping that it'll help the priest to enrich their homilies and kind of shorten that preparation in time down. And then of course in the realm of Catholic education, I think there's a lot of potential there. It's one of the most important groups that we're working with right now.
Excellent. And I'm curious about that, specifically with Catholic education. I think practically I can imagine how AI would be used in that setting, but what are some ways that it's actually being applied today or looking to be applied in the near future?
Sure. I mean, we've noticed a lot of people using it for curriculum development. So determining, what are some ways I can enhance my current curriculum, right? So that's one way, because the AI has access to such a vast amount of knowledge, and now that it's being trained on it, it's able to kind of understand it conceptually at a pretty crazy level, right? It would be difficult for any human being because there's just so much knowledge to crunch, and so we found it can be useful in that respect. And then, of course, once you build out kind of a curriculum, and the question is, how do you then go into the respective sections and build those out, right? What content can be brought to bear? And again, what we're seeing is one of the benefits of Magisterium AI is because it has access to over, right now, I think it's over 18,000 works of the church. There's a lot that can be pulled down. And in some ways, a lot of that content may surprise you, right? You may not know that the fathers of the church, in addition to having great reflections on theology and some philosophical topics, they also have great biblical commentaries and things. And so what we've been finding is that people are kind of often surprised at how much they can kind of, tease out. So I think curriculum development will be one, and I think specifically as homeschooling has been growing of late, I think it puts a lot of pressure on parents. They have to begin be these kind of walking Catholic encyclopedias, and so I think knowing at home with their kids that they can actually work with a tool to kind of prepare themselves for a particular lesson with their kids, and then once they're mature enough to be able the kids to use the platform directly, I think will be a big help as well.
I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious about what yours are. Are you worried that AI might potentially take away from people's ability to think critically or think through or even just do research on their own? Or is this just like what happened with the internet and Google? It's just an evolution in how people access information.
Well, I think to some extent, I think we have to be careful. I think, in the past, we spent a lot of time in universities committing a lot to memory, right? And I think, with all this knowledge being available to us at our fingertips, it may mean we don't have to make such a tremendous effort to memorize things. That could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing, right? But I think ultimately, I'm not worried about it. I think, I'm sure when books came around and all of a sudden the knowledge was there at our fingertips, I'm sure some people were saying, I don't know how great that is. All the knowledge is in a book. You're not going to have to commit the book to memory anymore, right? And so I think a lot of the concerns I've been shared anytime there's been a kind of a technological shift, we have these concerns. I think in the end, I think people will realize it's going to be okay. It's not going to be such a big deal. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that human beings, I think, are just infinitely curious. And I think as long as we have important questions, I think we're always going to be looking for ways to have those questions answered. And AI is just simply a very efficient tool for getting those questions answered. And so I'm not overly concerned about it. But I do think that, especially when you're talking about education and the development of children, I think it's important to make sure that the tools are used within certain kind of domains and at certain times, so they have the chance to kind of develop other faculties as well. And they don't become overly reliant on them at too young an age. But I think given where humanity's headed, I think it's going to be an absolute necessity for these young people to learn how to leverage these tools as effectively as possible, because if they don't, it'll be very difficult for them to eventually enter the labor workforce, because everyone will be using it to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not worth ignoring or burying our head in the sand. It's here to stay, and we as Catholics should embrace it, and exactly what you guys are trying to do, find a way to use it to the advantage of the church. I want to come back to this, to what you said earlier about hallucinations, because I think that was a big reason why you started Magisterium AI in the first place. What are your thoughts about this phenomenon? Why does it occur? And what does it mean, generally speaking, for AI's reliability? I know there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said, so hallucinations are basically when you ask an AI a question, and for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like it has it can't access a correct answer, and so what it ends up doing is it kind of makes up an answer, which sounds convincing, but it's actually not factual, right? And so this is the issue with kind of AI to date is how can you know if what it's saying is true? And so there are platforms like Perplexity and others which try to ground what they have to say in sources. But then the question is, can those sources be trusted? Right? And so I want to say that with advances in AI, they're getting better and better at mitigating this. OpenAI has just released these new advanced reasoning models, which are much better at catching hallucinations, basically because they go through this process of thinking about things over and over again. And as they do, they often are able to catch most hallucinations. But generative AI is what we call non-deterministic, because the way it works is it's kind of next token prediction. I won't get too much into the technical details here, but essentially it's based on statistical probabilities, and so there's always the possibility that token after token prediction eventually it's going to get off the rails. And so you just have to recognize that is a fundamental limitation of the actual technology. I think different approaches will be needed to make them more deterministic, to make them more reliable. But what we found within our company, working on things like guardrails, so teaching the AI to follow certain instructions, like don't make things up, and to ensure that the AI has access to as much knowledge as possible, so it never has to go to its own training data to answer something. And this is something that we worked really hard on our first year when we launched the product. Was when we launched it in pilot, we had all the catechisms, the Code of Canon Law, and things like that. But the long tail, we call it, the possible questions people were asking were very difficult to foresee, and some of the questions shocked us. A lot of them were contextual, scenarios. What would the church say to me in this situation? And we realized that the knowledge we had wasn't nearly sufficient. So we spent basically a year digitizing basically all Catholic knowledge which is available online, which was a heavy lift. But we realized the more church teaching we gave it, the more official context we gave it, the better the AI came at answering questions. And namely because when someone asked a question, it was able to find some kind of document which spoke directly to that, and it would ground what it says back to the persons in that document, and that kind of keeps it on specific rails. And so there's always a challenge. It's never perfect, but we found basically to date, hallucinations have been not entirely mitigated, but we think we successfully mitigated them for the vast majority of users and queries.
In your opinion, should AI development, even where it stands today, be more tightly controlled? And do you have any ideas of safeguards or standards that you'd like to see implemented, or even that you think are necessary? And I would say, especially when used in areas pertaining to the church and ministry.
I am concerned about AI in the same way Elon Musk and others are concerned about AI, in the sense that it's an incredibly powerful technology which gets smarter and smarter and smarter, every month. And I do think it being such a powerful tool, it has to be very carefully, controlled to some extent. At the same time, I also worry about the centralization of that control, among a few companies or particular governments, right? We've already seen this an example, and I don't want to pick on Google too much here, but Google's Gemini product, when it came out, the safety rails that were in it were many accused of being quite woke, right? And so because of that, we had issues when we were testing Google's Gemini initially for Magisterium AI. Is it just refused to answer certain church teaching because it considered it like hate speech, and so that was quite striking. So it's important to recognize that the larger models, the frontier models we call them, that are out there, they're not neutral. I mean, they're biased because they're trained on human data, right? And that human data often has biases in it. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. I think one of the best ways of kind of mitigating that is to try as much as possible to leverage AI tools which try and ground what they say in sources which you can check and verify. So I'm a big fan of Perplexity, for instance, because everything it says is grounded in a source which you can then look into. Now, it's not always necessarily in line, but the point is, I like that it's making that effort. Same thing, Magisterium AI's approach is, let's ground everything that we're saying within a source. So overall, I'm very bullish. I think AI is going to be very transformative. I think it will usher in kind of a new era of abundance. But it's gonna take some. What I'm really hoping is that the church will be very involved in these conversations, because I don't think the answer is to allow, to basically make it impossible for the frontier AI to make it into the open source and just let the few companies control it and the governments are in charge of regulating that. I have concerns about that. So I do think open source, I think, is important. I think making sure that everyone has access to powerful AI, and that AI can be kind of trained for your specific use case. And so in that case, it's just a great plethora of AI systems, and people can pick the ones that align with their value system. I think in some ways that's probably the best approach. But of course, that comes with risks as well, because then you have some bad actors who may use it to harm people. So I think more than anything else, I don't think there is a simple solution here, but I do think that the conversation has to be robust, and I think that the church has to be very much involved in this and encouraging conversation, not just at the government and the regulatory level, but also I think at the grassroots level. We have to be informed about AI, what its the benefits are, what its limits are, and we have to be actively engaged in a conversation about what kind of AI we want to see in our society.
Do you think that, and you just sort of alluded to this, but do you think that we are going to move in this direction of having particular AI tools instead of these general ones, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and perhaps I'm also just speaking from a point of ignorance here, but do you think there'll be more of these specific tools based on a specific need, or, in this case, what you've done with Magisterium AI, the teachings of the Catholic Church? Do you think we're trending in that direction?
Yeah, I think it's both and. I think we call that tool AI. So I think that the big tech companies are all chasing AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is basically an AI which has the ability to generalize its knowledge into a whole bunch of different domains, kind of like how a human can use its intelligence to do all kinds of different things. They're trying to build an AI system which has the same capabilities, and that kind of fixation on that goal it means, for the most part, that they're fairly preoccupied with achieving technological breakthroughs, which will ultimately lead to that, because they know that that's going to be a big prize. But I do think that leaves there's a lot of opportunities for tool AI. Matterstream AI is a form of tool AI. It's the application of AI to a particular use case, and I do expect there'll be a very large proliferation of that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of open source AI. I think allowing people to take a good AI system and then to tweak it, to fine tune it for their own purposes is powerful. I frankly, I wouldn't want to live in a world where 5 companies have all the leading AIs and basically they're powering all AI applications. I think that's a little bit disturbing. And frankly, I don't think the AI companies themselves would embrace that kind of future. But again, they have some significant advantages, and since they're well capitalized, they have a lot of the best AI talent in the world. So I have to say, as controversial as a person as he is, I'm very grateful to people like Mark Zuckerberg who've decided to build cutting edge AI and then open source it so anyone can use it, regardless of what his intentions may be. It's adding an enormous value to the world, and I think as long as there are companies taking that approach, it probably will work out okay.
And again, maybe I'm coming from a place of ignorance here, but it also seems like if there were just several tools that everyone used, how even could the tools reconcile differences in belief systems? So, you mentioned how Google Gemini was basically programmed to be woke, and on the flip side, how could you reconcile that with Catholic teaching and having a tool that would actually show that? So, I guess what I'm saying here is, it seems to me like having specific tool AIs would be the way to go, because a general AI wouldn't be able to reconcile all these different worldviews anyways.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct, Mike. I mean, I think we can't put all of our trust in a few huge AI systems which are controlled by a few companies, and the reason for that is being faithful. Let's just say in the area of let's say Catholic teaching, it takes a lot of effort. And so you have to train the model to be faithful, and then you have to do post training on it, right? And so these companies are not going to prioritize that. And now, in time, the AIs, as they get more and more intelligent, they have access to more and more knowledge. They may get more and more capable of representing church teaching accurately, and I fully expect that they will. But that being said, I think there is a good reason for the church to want to take ownership of this process to some extent. I mean, here's one reason. The only reason we built Vulgate is because we recognize that to train Catholic AI, we need to actually work to digitize more and more of the Catholic Church's knowledge. I mean, only a small portion of Catholic theological thought is captured, has been digitized at this point. All you have to do is walk through some of the pontifical universities in Rome, which I've had the pleasure of doing, and you see all of those books, many of which haven't been open in hundreds of years. There's profound insights in those books, and that's part of the Catholic intellectual tradition. But because no one's opened the book in a while, no one's digitized it, it remains inaccessible to us. And the Catholic data set right now is so small, you couldn't train a powerful AI on it alone. So we need to expand that data set, and that's one of the reasons why we built Vulgate, is to do that. There's also kind of a limit with the capabilities of AI models, like multilingual capabilities or the ability to actually do speech or advanced reasoning. These are capabilities that require a lot of unique tokens or training data. And the Catholic Church doesn't have a large enough data set to have those to actually train those capabilities into a Catholic model. So we have to rely on external data sets, but then we need to figure out, how do we ensure the AI system understands what data sets are used to help it understand multilingual, how to speak in multiple languages or to reason in an advanced way. But it understands the distinction between those data sets and the Catholic data set, right, which is what it really should be opining on and speaking on. That requires certain technological approaches, which are very novel. And we as a company are realizing we have to focus a lot more on research and development in these areas, because the big tech companies just won't. And so this is a long way of saying that I do think that the church has to take, just like the printing press, it has to take ownership of artificial intelligence has to work to kind of build its own. And I think that will not only will that benefit actually the Catholic Church, but I think it could benefit faith communities around the world, because the Catholic Church is uniquely positioned to do this because we have such a large body of knowledge compared to other religious traditions. I mean, going back 2,000 years. And so in some ways we can kind of be a first mover on this. And as we tackle these technical challenges, we can share those approaches with others and hopefully benefit them as well.
Earlier, you claimed that AI could usher in an era, I think you said, of abundance, and you're clearly optimistic about what AI could do for the world. But you've also claimed before that it could replace nearly half of jobs, or at least make half the population gainfully unemployed. That seems stark to me. What do you think that would actually look like? And what are people going to do with their time?
I think I'd be conservative in saying no, that within 10 years, likely half the world's population would be gainfully unemployed. And what I mean by that is that the economy won't require them to work for. And I define economy and I define work in very narrow terms here, very conventional terms as we'd understand them today. So that is a major concern, and I do worry about that. In fact, I think any serious person who's working in AI is concerned about that, and anyone who is not following the technology closely, or they have reasons for not being honest about the long-term implications of artificial intelligence. And when I talk about artificial intelligence, I don't just mean artificial intelligence. I also mean robotics. It's important to make that distinction. AI, we tend to think of as coming for a lot of white-collar jobs, right? Doctors, lawyers, and these kind of things. But the robots are coming for the blue-collar jobs as well, and they're going to be powered by AI. So this is why I think it's important that we Catholics understand that what this technology is and what the long-term implications are going to be for our society, because we need to start talking about what are we going to do with our time in a world where we don't have to work. And let me speak very briefly before I talk about that specifically, the role I think that the church could play in that future, and just also reflect a little bit about the superabundance. Although, yes, I think that AI and robotics will displace a lot of jobs, I also think it'll make goods and services so cheap. And it's not just me. I mean, obviously, some of the leading luminaries in the world think this as well. Goods and services so cheap that, really anybody can have really anything they want, up to a point, obviously. And so I think things like the Maslow hierarchy need stuff like shelter and food and water and these kind of things. I think those things will be readily available to everyone. And so in some ways, it seems like a very beautiful Star Trek Next Generation world, right? Where we just, those problems we've been confronted with in the past, especially around related inequality, are just going to be ushered into the past. That's not to say that there may not be other issues as a result, but one of the things I do worry about in this future is when people don't have a job. A lot of people, that they define their value as a human being based on what they do, right? And I think if that job is no longer there, for a lot of people, this could become an existential crisis, right? What is the purpose of my life then? I have free time on my hands. How do I constructively, use that time? If I don't know how I'm supposed to live my life or what the purpose of life is, that may become, so stressful for me that I don't feel equipped to deal with the issue. So I'm just going to disappear into a gaming verse or something like that, right? Which ultimately I don't think would be constructive for people, especially if they're doing that for large parts of their day. So I think we are headed towards an existential crisis to the extent we've never seen before, and we have to acknowledge that and be prepared for that. And I worry if we just leave it to governments to address this, because they just won't. They think in 4-year cycles for the most part, right? Because electoral cycles, and this is I'd say I'd say this is about a 10-year problem, although the problem is already starting to manifest itself now. I think that the church has to be that voice, as it has been in the past. We look at when the Industrial Revolution, Rerum Novarum, these encyclicals, the popes were very good at prophetically. Seeing how these trends, these technological trends, will play out on society, and in some ways they helped facilitate a conversation and head off what could have been a worse situation. I think we need the church to do this again for us in AI, and then Pope Francis has already started to do this, and I think if we acknowledge the issue and when we start a process of educating people about what life is really all about, right? Which is worshiping God, which is deepening our relationships with each other, focusing on our kids. And I think work can be defined more broadly, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a place where I punch in, out of for a paycheck. Work can take all kinds of forms. It could be taking up hobbies, right? It could be working to serve people in my community and address problems which maybe don't pay that well, but need to be solved. So I think if we're prepared as a species for this change, I think it could be a new golden era. But if we're not, I think we could head into a dark period of humanity, which would be ironic given it won't be because of lack of resources. It'll be because of spiritual poverty, essentially.
Yeah, that's going to be quite an interesting time. But to your point, we've been through these revolutions and evolutions in technology before, and God's good. And also, to your point, the church usually does an excellent job of getting in front of those situations. So I think, to your point, there should be a lot of hope. I think that's a hopeful outlook on what could happen as AI replaces some of the standard jobs that we see today. So thank you for that answer. Some might have concerns about relying on AI for faith matters. How do you address the balance between technology and the human element, especially in ministry? We just sort of talked about this, but how do we avoid people just becoming more and more tethered to the digital world and actually maintain those human elements, especially in the church? I mean, we need the human element, as we know, in the church, and even just for the sacraments, we need that human, tangible element.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think this comes down to human and spiritual formation, which is something the church is obviously very good at, but has not always been very effectual at. So I think that's kind of where we're at today. Is there's a lot of really compelling distractions for young people today, right? And I think we've kind of ceded our media, to the secular world for too long, and as a result, I think that spiritual and that human intellectual formation has been provided by others. And so I think we have to reclaim those domains. That's part of it. I think it's really going to come down, I think, to parenting as well. The church has to work a lot harder, I think. And I take, as a layperson, I take responsibility for this as well. We have to work harder to build up ourselves as Catholics to kind of grow, our spiritual, intellectual, and our human formation, so that we can impart that to our children and to others. And I think if we do that, these powerful tools are going to be less of a problem. I think the reason why they're likely to be a problem for a great many is because they don't really know what life's about. They don't really feel like they have purpose or meaning. They don't know better, and they're feeling a little bit depressed, right, or lost. And so, because they don't know what to do and they don't know how to solve the problems especially the existential ones, they're just choosing to opt out, right, and disappear into a gaming world where they actually feel like they actually can solve problems and level themselves up, and they see themselves progress. And so I think we have to offer people viable alternatives to that. We have to provide them the means to actually grow spiritually, right? To grow intellectually, and to be better parents, to be better husbands and things like that. I think if we do a better job at doing that, then I don't think that these technological distractions are going to be as big of an issue. So I just want to say, I don't think the issue is the technology and the tools. Yes, they're kind of built in some ways to hook people and they are, I think, in many ways very addictive. And that is something of an issue that I think we can address with the industry, and that the church can be involved in kind of lobbying for that. I think regulators are looking at that as well. But ultimately, I think it's really going to come down to personal accountability and responsibility. And the best way to ensure that we as a species stay on the rails is just to ensure that everyone knows what life's about, and they know what their gifts are, and they know what they want to put those gifts to do, to service do, which is basically to glorify God and serve others.
Do you think we'll see a rediscovery or an explosion in the arts with AI sort of, replacing our jobs, or people that want to put their children on that path of not getting sucked into the digital world, but doing something that still, obviously helps their creative needs and desires? Do you think we'll see an explosion in the arts based on this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm really excited about this future because many of the things that I don't feel like I have time for, I may actually have time for. I mean, and not just, the arts, but being able to actually go and grow something in the backyard for a change, right? There are a lot of things I think that we rely on civilization to deliver to us, like, our food supply, right? Or even how we go about generating energy. These are all things. And I think if we have more time in our hands, these are things we may be able to actually do ourselves. And so in some ways, this is, I think, can really empower subsidiarity at some level. So I'm really excited about that. I also think that even from a theological and philosophical perspective, I think the reason why we have the Plato's and the Aristotles is because, quite frankly, they weren't hunting all the time, right? They had time to sit around and think, and I think for this could lead to a new boom of a philosophical and theological insight, right? People have time to pray, to think, and I think this is good, and again, this is something that only human beings can uniquely do. AIs may be able to very effectively query the theological and philosophical reflection of the past, which is in books and things like that, and make it available to us, and that can help us. But in the end of the day, God speaks to human beings through human beings, right? So if we want to do theology, if we want to do philosophy, if we want original signal, as we say in the AI world, well, it's gonna mean that we're gonna have to take the time to actually do it, because the AI is not gonna be doing theology and philosophy. It'll simply be a tool which will be help people and hopefully supercharge their ability to actually think critically about these theological and philosophical topics.
So we have a lot of parish staff, parish leaders, diocesan leaders, ministry leaders who listen to this podcast. Perhaps some of them are curious but hesitant. And you mentioned how important it is for the church to really understand and be a voice when it comes to the development and the use of AI. For these Catholic leaders, where would you recommend they start exploring AI? And are there good sources that you can give them where they can actually pay attention to the conversation and how things are moving?
Yeah, I would say for those who are listening, who have never really interacted directly with an AI tool, recognizing, of course, that AI is under the hood of almost any technological product you're dealing with, but have never directly interacted with it, I would say a good tool to start with would probably be Perplexity AI. And the reason I suggest that is it's like ChatGPT. It's powered by large language models, but it also is a web search browser, and it was built to try and provide honest answers. And what I mean by that is that everything it says is grounded in some kind of source, right? And I mean like it's just transparent about where the answers come from. And so I think Perplexity is a good place to start, because when you ask a question, it will not only answer your question, but it'll tell you where it got that information from. And I would say Magister Mei within the Catholic domain would make sense as well for basically the exact same reason. And I think the nice thing about once you find a platform like Perplexity that you like, you can start bringing all kinds of questions about things like artificial intelligence, the philosophical consequences of it, how should I use it in the classroom? That these are all questions you can then bring to the AI product, and it will go and do the research for you and help. The other point I'll just make, for the teachers and the catechists and things like that, is just to recognize that the world right now is already changing because of AI. And I know that you feel this already, but companies like Google are already starting to lay off engineers because AI is doing this work now. I just gave a talk with a bunch of high school students who are very soon going to be graduating, in a few years, and some of the questions were quite, I think, striking. I mean, they were wondering, am I going to have a job when I graduate? Right? I mean, what industry can I get a job in? If AI and robotics are going to be doing most of the work, I mean, like, what should I be specializing in now? And that was a very, very difficult questions to deal with. And basically what my answer was to them is, yes, the labor market is going to be much more competitive. I mean, as these big companies start laying off employees, right? These are employees who have been in the workspace for, maybe up to 10 years, right? So they have the degrees and they have the work experience. And now you as a young person are now entering into this labor market, and you're competing against these people for jobs. It's extremely difficult. And so I encourage them as much as possible to recognize that they're going to have to be figuring out every way they can to leverage AI tools, to augment their own capabilities with AI tools to increase their capabilities. That's one thing. And two, as much as possible, if they can discern, what their gifts are, try to figure out a problem that their gifts can solve, and then try to solve it, right? And then try to take that solution and make it known as widely as possible. Because in the future, a lot of these companies, what they'll be looking for is people that have actually solved the problem, right? And they've made it known, and the company acknowledges this is someone who actually is able to, to actually build and fix things and solve things. And this is the kind of person that the company wants, as opposed to someone they have to, take out of university and teach all these skills to as well. So you want to try and level yourself up in as many ways as possible and make yourself basically more appealing to these companies.
Is there anything Longbeard is putting out, or any other, even just news sources that kind of stay on top of the latest and greatest with AI that you would recommend people tune into just to, again, stay on top of this topic?
We're going to be starting a webinar series through the Builders AI Forum, which will be on a quarterly basis, in which we'll talk about AI topics. So some of the bigger kind of AI technologies and breakthroughs, which affect society, but also I think will affect the church. And so I would say just keep an eye on the BAIF website, baif.ai. Longbeard, of course, will be posting on our own social channels these platforms, and when these conversations take place, that'd be one thing. The other thing would be, there are newsletters you can subscribe to. There's one very famous one called the Rundown AI, and they send a kind of a daily digest during the week in which they kind of recount some of the latest AI breakthroughs. Many of them are technologies which will affect your work and such. And so that's one really effective way of keeping tabs. YouTube is full of all kinds of channels now, reflecting on the AI news of the week. I think it's always worthwhile to subscribe to one of those. They're usually very very brief, but at least you'll be able to keep tabs. And I think as much as possible, just try and set aside some time, if not every week, at least every 2 weeks, just to do a little research using a tool like Perplexity. And so some of the problems you may be confronted with, whether it be at your parish or at your school, some of those may have technological solutions now. And just taking those problems to an app like Perplexity and just letting the AI comb the internet and see if there is any solution out there, that you may be surprised what's out there. And so I think generally that would probably be my advice.
And for folks that are interested in the forum that you just held at the Vatican, would the Builders AI Forum also be a good source of information for those in the church that are curious about that forum? I think you guys also even have some talks that were published from that.
That's right. Yeah. So the Builders AI Forum, which took place a few weeks ago at the Vatican, all the keynotes addresses and the panel conversations are all on the website. So if you're curious to see what that conversation consisted of, again, part of it was focused on talking about AI generally and where it's headed in society. How do we feel about this as Catholics? Part of it was talking about specifically around Catholic AI and where it's at now and where we want to take it. And the other part was on the kind of the philosophical dimensions of it. If any of those particular topics are of interest to you, you'll find talks on that. And we'll continue to do the Builders AI Forum hopefully on an annual basis. And as I say, we'll try to have webinars which will be open to the public, so people can join those conversations and ask questions live, and we'll try and field as many of those questions as we can.
Excellent. You've given us a lot of insights today, Matthew, so I want to thank you for that. Now, if there's one takeaway about AI and its future role in the church that you'd want to leave our viewers with, what would that one takeaway be?
It'd probably be an insight from Pope Francis. I mean, in the end, AI is a tool, right? And so it happens to be a very powerful tool, but like any tool, it can be used for good, it can be used for harm. And so I think this tool is here to stay, and I think it's on us to ensure, all of us, to ensure that the tool is being used, to benefit all of humanity. And so that means taking an active interest in getting engaged around the conversations around AI. And so I just encourage you, whether it be at your parish or at your school or even in the political domain, to be educating yourself on the technology and trying as much as possible to ask really tough questions and ensuring that the tool is being used to accelerate human flourishing. Excellent.
And you just gave us a few resources, but is there anywhere else our listeners can go to learn about you, to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could check out our website, longbeard.com. We're not as active on social media as we'd like to be, but we have some important innovations in the realm of AI we'll be speaking about soon. And and I should note that Magisterium AI, we just built an API, and this will allow anyone in the world to build on top of our AI system. So if you're looking to leverage AI, but you don't want to figure out like how to mitigate hallucinations and how to make sure the AI is faithful, and you don't want to go and digitize all of church's knowledge. If you're looking for a simple way, then you could take a look at leveraging our APIs. Our mission as a company is to help build and accelerate AI adoption in the church. And so what we're hoping is that the innovations that we make, the breakthroughs, will end up benefiting anybody who's trying to use Catholic AI in the church.
Excellent. You guys are actually practicing what you preach with making it open source. So thank you for that, Matthew. Well, Matthew, once again, thank you so much for your time today. This is extremely insightful. You've given us a lot to think about, and we'll probably talk to you again in the near future as AI just continues to rapidly advance. Thank you so much for the work you do. Thank you for your service to the church, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. God bless.